Great, let's get started. Welcome those who are joining us in the recording for the next Q Docs and Content call, where we're talking mainly about content that we're creating on qlang.org and currently alpha.qlang.org in support of the Q open source project and how to improve that documentation bluntly. So lots to get through today, so we'll get started. We're first of all going to summarize where we are right now with alpha.qlang.org and qlang.org, what's going on. We're going to have a brief tour through some of the new content that's been created since the last call, which was a few months ago now, actually. Talk about the go live of alpha.qlang.org, and then have a brief look at the content creation process. There's some automation we have behind the scenes, and we're just going to give a quick demo of how that actually helps with the content creation, but then also the maintenance of content going forward as well. And then if there's any Q&A, we can go through that at the end as well. The call is being recorded, and it will be linked from the discussion that we created ahead of today's session, which is linked, and we'll share the slides as well. Joined today by Jonathan. Jonathan has been working with the Q team to create some wonderful content on alpha.qlang.org, and has been a real driving force behind some of the thinking of how we can make the content itself more approachable for new users of Q, and also the way the site works together from a UX DX perspective. So thanks, Jonathan. So let's just have a quick summary of where we are right now. Last time we talked a bit about how we're why qlang.org, the current site, is insufficient in many respects and what we're doing in that respect. We've come a decent way since then, but just to summarize, we talked about the current qlang.org, lots of lack of content, lack of examples, etc. That's split into two venues: alpha.qlang.org, as we said, that's soon going to be the official qlang.org, and Q by example. We're not going to talk about Q by example today. We talked a bit about that last time. We've added a couple of bits of content to Q by example. Our efforts have really been focused on qlang.org or alpha.qlang.org since last time. We will be re-engaging on the Q by example stuff because the examples that Jonathan has been working on there have been picked up by a number of people saying, oh, very interesting to see that I can drive build kites using Q, for example, or fascinating to see the way that you drive GitHub Actions using Q. But we're not going to talk about Q by example today. We are going to talk about alpha.qlang.org. And I've got alpha dot in brackets there because as I've repeated perhaps about 4 or 5 times on this call already, alpha.qlang.org will soon replace qlang.org. And we'll talk about when exactly a bit later on. When it comes to alpha.qlang.org, or indeed qlang.org, we split our thinking here into 2 parts. There's like a build infra CI deployment part of the website, which is really hopefully uninteresting to most people. It should just exist in the background and do its job. The main part of it is obviously the content. And content we can think about in lots of different ways, but let's just call it content. Do people get what they want fundamentally from the site in terms of learning about Q? But when it comes to this, we've got a couple of GitHub projects that we're using to manage what it is we're doing with qlang.org. Discussion 2846, as we've covered on a couple of recent calls, explains our approach with using GitHub projects here and how we're trying to use GitHub projects to improve our communication in various aspects of the Q project. And what we're doing with qlang.org is no exception to that. So actually for the qlang.org stuff, and notice now I've stopped using the phrase alpha.qlang.org. I'm assuming we've gone live. We are using 2 roadmap projects for qlang.org related stuff. qlang.org roadmap, that's that build infra CI deployment piece. Should be boring. Nobody should really be too concerned with that. The site should just deploy. There should be no issues, etc. But that does also cover the tooling behind the content authoring piece. So it's somewhat interesting. But far more important is the docs and content roadmap. And Jonathan's going to talk a bit about that in a second. But firstly, to look at the qlang.org roadmap itself. Now, this is probably one of the least well-maintained in the last couple of weeks since we started this new approach to project communication. Really, we've been focusing on the docs and content roadmap. But here, let me just briefly take a look through the columns here to explain. As we get better at maintaining this and triaging what is in this project board more carefully, The backlog will just be the backlog, unsurprisingly. Planned will be work that is actually planned, in progress, and done. No real surprises there, but that should give folks who just drive by this project roadmap anytime a bit of a snapshot on where we are with the CI infra deployment pieces to do with qlang.org. But as I said, that really should fade into the background. So just flipping over to the docs and content roadmap, Jonathan, do you want to sort of talk us through a bit about how we're managing this?
Yeah, sure. So you'll notice if you just flick back to the previous one, that where we've got 4 columns there, on this one, we've got 5 columns. And we've got, just reading across the top, backlog, planned, ready, in progress, and done. The reason that we've gone with those, let's just very briefly, the headline for each of them, backlog is an idea piece, a content idea, or maybe a content bug. We have, that's the right place to be putting a bit of content is actually wrong. We haven't got something right, or it perhaps doesn't meet a particular user need. The reason here that we distinguish between planned and ready is because as Paul and I and some other folks have been working on the documentation, we found that going from having an idea to actually sitting down and writing the prose or writing the actual cue to display on screen, there's a really big gap between I think this idea is okay and can I just splurge out the words that are right thing, the right solution to that problem. So effectively, we needed something to capture the refinement of the actual user need here, and that's what we've done with the ready column. So if you come up with a content idea, or even better, some actual content, then don't worry if we go through a process of actually refining just the headline, the actual headline, the title of the page, in perhaps more detail than what you might think we might do, because the reason behind that is to get people into a place where the actual writing of it can then be a creative exercise as opposed to having to figure out what the heck you're actually writing. So that's why we've got that additional column here. Planned is we'd like to achieve this. At the moment, everything in planned is the things on the route towards promoting alpha.qlang.org. Ready is where we've done the work and said we have chiseled away and honed away at the actual description within this, so that somebody, probably Muggins here, can sit down and actually just write that text, write out the expression of that. In progress and done are as before, relatively obvious. Cool.
And that process of sort of going from planned to ready is actually a very useful one. It's something that we will look to do more of actually in the issues themselves, albeit if we have discussions offline, we'll look to capture the essence of those discussions in updates to issues as they get promoted from planned to ready. Really, the thing is, it's just to emphasize one thing is that there's no part of what we've been doing here where Jonathan or I individually or any one person holds all the answers here. It's absolutely a discovery process here, and it's been very, very useful to have conversations about, well, exactly what should be on this page, where would it go on the site, to sort of challenge, well, what are we trying to solve for here? Are we trying to solve for a brand newcomer to Q? What are they looking to answer here? Or is this someone who has a certain level of experience? How do we capture what that experience is? And so it's very useful, and doing that in having the distinction between planned and ready, therefore, is really that step of properly refining what that piece of content might look like. It might actually be that planned, sort of something that's in planned, therefore gets closed as an issue because we think, actually, you know what, we've talked ourselves out of this as an idea, but still a very useful exercise to do ahead of time and make sure it's sort of clear where it will fit in with the site. And we talked a bit on the last call, actually, about how the diataxis fits into that. And so that whole process of moving, sort of getting an item from planned to ready is just making sure, are we sure this is a how-to or is it a tutorial, whatever it is. And that's hopefully, as we get better at doing this stuff, when alpha.qlang.org gets promoted live, folks will just give us feedback of a good steer of whether this is working or not. We have had some excellent feedback from folks who have been trying alpha.qlang.org, saying not only does the site look good, it works really well in terms of the format of the content that we've but please, if there's any other feedback we have, let us know. So let's actually have a look at some of the new content that since the last time we've also been working on, in addition to sort of infrastructural parts of the site. A number of areas really here, everything that sort of it would be appropriate to covering bits of content that are appropriate to newcomers to Q, looking at sort of idiomatic ways of writing Q. Maybe there are certain patterns that folks are now referring to in how-tos, which sort of quickly answer, how do I do X? Modules, we can, modules is sort of in an experimental form, but we've quickly got a tutorial out demonstrating how to use modules as part of alpha.qlang.org, and we will continue to write more content for that because it's a very good way of showing people quickly how do I get started with modules, for example, even in its experimental form. Jonathan's done a number of pieces on standard library built-ins in Q. This is where you can, for example, import the strings package and do useful string manipulation tasks. This is covered in the documentation for those built-ins themselves. However, we don't mind the overlap here. We're quite happy to surface examples and good examples on qlang.org in order that folks have got like a one-stop shop for their answers on how to do things with Q, whether it be a long-form tutorial, piece of reference content, or literally, for want of a better phrase, a how-to or the docs related to a standard library built-in. This really is where qlang.org should be coming in.
It's worth saying that we haven't covered every single thing there.
No, true, yeah.
I'd be really interested if there were particular examples of where we haven't covered something on qlang.org or built in, and the documentation on the doc side wasn't sufficient to get somebody started or
Yep.
they actually couldn't figure out how to use something. I'd love to hear about those, because those are places where we can fill it in either place, but it probably points to a gap on qlang.org as well as anything. So if there's anything like that, any functions where you don't know how to use them or to use them well or to use them idiomatically, please let us know about that.
Indeed, the one thing we should say as well that we will get to a point where the examples that are in the actual code itself behind the built-ins will become the source of truth, so that we're not maintaining two separate examples. But for now, we're happy to maintain the two separately, because as we'll demonstrate quite shortly, all of the documentation on alpha.qlang.org is automatically tested, which is a huge help in terms of the maintenance side of things. We've got a number of bits of content around common file-based tasks, for example, how to combine multiple YAML files together using Q, transform that data. A couple of pieces of content around specific language concepts, for example, how to declare fields that have spaces in. These things might seem quite small, but if there's a how to or a specific piece of content that answers it, and the search, as we demonstrated last time, enables you to find these bits of content quickly, that's really the goal, people getting their answers quickly. And Jonathan's also been working on expanding the glossary as this still somewhat experimental way of routing to bits of content in a different form to the search. Jonathan, I think we're going to do a quick demo now of some of these bits of content, so I'll stop sharing and hand over to you.
Okay, let's make the screen do what we want to. Tell me if it looks like it's doing the right thing on your end.
Yep, so we've got how Q works with YAML.
Real. So this is going to take you through a few, 4 examples of the new content that we've put in. This is content that we've put in that I personally have a real focus on how things appear to that newcomer. I'm very happy to play the role of, obviously not my real role, of somebody who doesn't know anything about anything, and they want to find out about that first impression. So we've put together at the moment a couple of pages that to sort of a holistic, a rounded view of how Q works with YAML, put one together with JSON, and we've got other ones planned for the other integrations. So whilst the actual tasks, like you can see here, validating YAML files against a schema, transforming YAML files, while these are dealt with in more detail elsewhere on qlang.org, we felt that having a page that you could just drop into, as if you want to know, right, I've heard about this thing called Q, I've never seen it before, and my project has a bunch of YAML in it, it would make sense to learn if I can do stuff with YAML before I even bother looking further at Q. This is the sort of page that we have in mind will be the right sort of thing for people in that place.
Just briefly, Jonathan, before you move off this page, if you don't mind scrolling to the top here. As you've sort of been scrolling down, folks will have sort of seen a varying array here of different types of code blocks, terminal, output, etc. worth noting that all of if you just hover over perhaps the left-hand code block there, all of this is copy pastable. As you see, the copy button that is there's just jumps up there, and all of these examples are entirely reproducible locally. It was a very good piece of feedback on the last call where someone said, well, or on a recent community call, I think it was actually, where somebody said, can we make all of these examples available as standalone Q files rather than having to copy paste? That's absolutely something we have planned. We've been focused on the content itself for now, but all of these examples here are automatically checked so that we don't have to validate that this is how it behaves with the current version of Q. And where there's a page that depends on a slightly different version of Q, we always call that out at the top. I don't think we actually have an example we'll look at today, Jonathan, but that's...
We're not going to have one for that today, but we definitely have that in place. And as well as the code examples being copyable, the copy button for this element here is just the command. So not the $, not the data, just the command. So we've got that so that you can actually pull the single command out and use it directly. Okay, on to the second example. So this is, well, hopefully as the title shows, using list sort strings to sort list of strings.
1 second, Jonathan. We're still on the first.
Ooh, that'll be because I shared a tab and not a window. I'm going to flick over to share this tab instead. I'll do them one by one. Let me know when it comes through, Paul.
That's good. It's there.
Okay, so this is, as the title says, using list sort strings to sort list of strings. I know you can come up with a better title for that one. I'd be interested. The point of this page is to show how powerful that one simple look, the queue alongside a terminal block, can be. The fact that so many things inside Q are so elegantly powerful, but quite concise and succinct, that we thought, well, it'd be great if we just sort of show off that power in really, really small snippets like this, where if you want to get a list of sorted strings, there you are, bang, it's just in front of you on the screen. So that's the sort of example of the sort of thing that we've got there. These are what we're calling commented Q how-tos, which are where we have just some Q and some output, and as needed, comments inline in the queue. In this instance, it's such a simple one that it doesn't even need the comment alongside it.
Worth calling out that there you've got the label, Jonathan, with the little pink dot just below the title.
Yes, we've got
which
we've got the
if you click on that, that actually will take us to well, you might have to click on it within that tab because there we go. Thank you. That then jumps us to a page which has got search results that are limited by the tag commented Q. So that style that Jonathan was talking about there is one that's repeated across a number of bits of content. So you can start with commented Q as your search filter, if you like, and then search within that to get more specific results, for example.
Here's another one, which is a commented Q again, but it deals with something we don't talk about too often. That's CSV. I know that the command Q doesn't support CSV directly as a thing to write, but you can, as we can see here, emit it and indeed read it as well. So I felt that this was something, especially in big data world of people actually wanting to just do the right thing with actually being able to validate that they've got the right stuff sitting around in their big globs of CSV. I felt it's probably useful for us to have something in place to show, you can both access it and emit it. You'll see that we've got ones here. We've got something here where we're combining multiple files. We're combining CSV and Q to produce one terminal block output. That's one of the really nice things about the form that we've got here. We've got a little 2x2 matrix where we can show any sort of combination of input files, output, etc. So that's that one. And then on the last example that we've got today is one that the Paul and I put together very much prompted by a question on Slack. And for this, we have kicked off the user question tag. This is the only one we've got there, so we would love to hear more questions. That's why we want questions to come up in Slack and on discussions, etc. Because if we can turn them into something where that multiple people can get use out of, not just the people who asked the question originally, then certain types of question do really help with that. And this piece of documentation here, which is really skip to the end, spoiler alert, as it were, it's telling people about using aliases when you've got strings being, sorry,
Fields that are shadowed.
fields with the same name as the thing that they're referring to. And so we've got lots of feedback on that. This one was actually really useful for a whole bunch of different folks, which is why we were really, really happy that that question came up, and we managed to get, I think, I can't remember what the turnaround was on this one, Paul, but it felt like we got it out in, the bulk of it done in about less than a day after the question was asked, and then published within a couple of days, I think, if I recall correctly.
And this is actually a very long piece of content as well.
Yeah.
So it's quite an involved piece. This is what we refer to as a concept guide, which, again, we're trying our best to interpret the documentation diataxis here. And so a concept guide is when somebody is learning, they're looking for more of an explanation behind something rather than that immediate short soundbite answer. And so the format that Jonathan came up with here, of where he sort of had it as like this is why we're experimenting with the user question category here, but he sort of got it in the form of like a question that's asked out loud, and that's the quoted form there, where we then explore the detail of it afterwards. And it did really resonate in the Slack threads. So again, a number of these sorts of things with the user question tag, this format of presentation, we sort of really need to be honest and say that they're experiments to see if they land well with people. And if they do, great. If it's the only piece of content that exists in that format, not terrible either. So it is just about being steered by what it is that people are looking to get answers to. But this particular piece landed very well.
It's worth mentioning that you mentioned there the concept guides being the slightly lengthier pieces.
Yep.
The way that the documentation framework that we're using, diataxis, explains them is to say that the concept guides or explanations are print it out and sit in the bath ones. That's how it puts it, and I really like that as a term. It's like, yeah, something you could print out and just have a good read through. So it's neither dense technical tome, but nor is it highly specific to one minute little area. So personally, that's why I really like writing the concept guides, because it lets you have a nice, it's the right length of thing as far as I can, for my sort of writing anyway. Paul, back over to you.
Yes, just to briefly on that point, I don't think anyone would catch me printing that out and reading that particular guide in the bath. Okay, let's just get back to the presentation itself. So we just had hopefully a screen share. We just had a quick demo. New content that's been created. Now briefly to talk about alpha.qlang.org going live. It seems like we've been talking about this for a long time, and we really have. But the reality is that a number of people have actually been using alpha.qlang.org as their primary documentation point, reference point, etc., and really helping us to kick the tires on it. Their feedback's been fantastic in terms of telling us what's working, what's not working, etc.
It's worth pointing out, Paul, that we've made sure that every single page on qlang.org has now, and it has an equivalent on Alpha. Alpha is a strict superset of qlang.org, so there is no excuse not to use Alpha for all of your documentation needs. And
indeed, it is a very much larger superset as well because of all the new content that's been created. We are aiming to flip the switch between. Excuse me, I will try that again. We are aiming to flip the switch before KubeCon EU on the 20th of March, i.e. in 15 days' time. Jonathan said we do have bits of content on alpha.qlang.org that either are identical to or improve on existing content. It will be very much the case that we will, for those pieces that we do need to iterate and improve on, we'll be doing that live then effectively. So we will literally just be saying, well, here's a brand new piece of content, or we need to improve this piece of content. Whilst the preparation of that in terms of a PR or a change in Gerrit will happen without it being live, our aim is to, as Jonathan sort of suggested earlier on, just get new content or updates to content live as quickly as possible, and then rely on things like site search for people to find new content. And we're also going to explore ways for navigating it slightly more a bird's eye view perspective through things like tags to look at the shape of the documentation beyond the split that the diataxis gives us of reference material, concept guides, tutorials, and how-tos. So we are going to be looking at that, but we want to get live now as sort of quickly as possible, and then work with folks in the community, have feedback and ideas on the stuff to drive how it should be shaped going forward. So now briefly to take a look at the content creation side of things. As I said, we've got a quick demo here, which I'm just going to have to do a quick flip around. And Jonathan, I'm going to be effectively driving blind here. So you're going to have to shout if this does not work from a screen share perspective at any point.
Sure.
And just shout when that has come through. Okay. We should be on the browser.
Post Firefox coming up.
You got Firefox? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is a piece of content that Jonathan showed earlier on. It's a how-to guide that is already live, but I'm just going to do a bit of a demo to show how the content authoring process works locally and effectively what is behind this page, because we sort of hinted at there being some automated tooling behind the scenes that helps with the creation of these guides, such that we write a guide and then this result on the right-hand side here, which is ultimately derived from the left-hand side, that we don't have to maintain it, basically. So we just write the left-hand side, and then this right-hand side result is automatically sort of maintained for us, or at least we get some help along the way. The keen-eyed among you will have spotted that actually there's an error on this page that I've deliberately introduced, whereas the input here should be unsorted. It is, in fact, sorted. And so we're going to fix that. And we're just going to flip over here, and here you can see unsorted. This is the markdown file that is behind this page here. And just very briefly, this is the code block. I've just highlighted the code block here that is behind this structure that you see on the page here.
And we get all of the site Chrome. If you go to, you can see there's only 8 lines that you can't see at the top of this page. So each individual page doesn't concern itself with all of the site Chrome. It's really content focused.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just focus on this code block right now, because that's fundamentally the thing that, as I said, is driving this code block here, and we want to fix this bit here. So that's fine. Let me just do that, and I'm just going to jump down, and this is the file.q within this code block here. And you can see that unsorted is, in fact, indeed unsorted. So let's fix this by not only making it unsorted, but let's just break it slightly in that we'll break the formatting as well, and see what happens. Now, when I save this file here, behind the scenes, there is what's called the preprocessor running in serve mode. And that is not only serving the page we saw in Firefox, but it's also doing some sort of helper work here. So that if I actually reload this file, which I just did in the flash of a keystroke there, you can now see that it is formatted unsorted to sort of shift it all the way left again, but it is now fixed the output in the outside of things as well to also be unsorted. But we still see that the result itself is sorted. And unsurprisingly, if we flip back to the browser via Hugo's auto reload plugin, we now have this page automatically reloaded to show us the fixed version, i.e. with the unsorted input. And then the output is automatically, as I demonstrated, maintained with only having to change the line in file.q. And you can see this is all automatically formatted as well. So this is just a brief glimpse. We're not going to do any more at this point here in terms of a demo. This is just a brief glimpse at how the automation behind the authoring side of things helps with the actual initial piece of content creation. The real power for us actually comes when we are now, for example, releasing a new Q version, which we are currently doing at a new alpha once a week. Is that to know that we haven't broken something on the site. We can now change the version of Q that is behind alpha.qlang.org as it is currently, regenerate the entire site, and then just make sure we understand where the changes have come in the documentation, and even check, are they as expected, given the changes that have happened in Q itself. And as we start to make changes to upgrade the evaluator, or as the new evaluator starts to roll out, that's going to become incredibly important. Because, for example, if we improve error messages in some situation, or we fix error messages, we need to actually make sure the documentation reflects that improved state of the nation. Having to go through and check every piece of content by hand would be a task I wouldn't wish on everybody. So this automation is going to help us massively as Q itself starts to improve. And as we demonstrated as well, there's tutorials, for example, around modules, and all of this is also automatically tested as well. So even though modules involve a remote registry, we have a way of actually making that work locally within the guide. That means we can also verify that modules work, for example. Jonathan, anything that you wanted to add there before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure it's sort of clear in people's head. The pre-process that you mentioned, in case people can't see the URL bar in the font size you've got there.
Yeah.
The pre-process is running on your local machine.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to play devil's advocate here, where certainly, as someone who's contributed to a variety of different sort of documentation projects, sometimes, certainly when I came into doing working with yourselves on this, I thought, wouldn't it be? I'm used to the process of just throwing a markdown file change at a project, and there we go. There's obviously a fix here, a typo here, or a new bit of content, and what have you. The build process is responsible for taking that. The power of being able to do the local preprocessor running with the complexity that comes from more than just changing one text file. You know, you've got to run a piece of code running locally. That complexity is hugely more than offset by the benefit that you get from that local processor being able to see in real time not only what the layout of the page looks differently, but the actual output from the queue and from any other commands that we got there. So I just wanted to flag for anyone who's thinking, yeah, I could see myself doing a typo fix, but perhaps not doing a whole new bit of content if I've got to actually run some. The process is genuinely delightful once you're actually in a state of being able to make the change. I'm not going to lie, for different classes of machine, the process, you know, you're going to have a Go environment to run the preprocessor, and there's going to be some people for whom that is trivial. There's going to be some folks for whom that is not completely trivial. But it is very, very, very much more than worth doing that. So I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, it's kind, and you actually bring up a good point. Is it sort of seems a bit daunting to make any sort of contribution, given what we've just demonstrated there. That's absolutely not the case, and we've got a specific slide later on when we talk about that. And to in particular pick up Jonathan's point about, can I just fix a typo without running the preprocessor? 100%. There's sort of a two-stage process to accepting a change there, whereby if somebody just wants to do a typo change, and we've already had a couple of those, so thanks to those who have spotted small errors here or there, it is possible to not run the preprocessor, and we can take that, the tiny load of running the preprocessor to fix things up, it cause the typo change to filter through ourselves as we import the PR, for example, into the code repository.
So PRs are a really acceptable way of throwing changes like that.
Very much so.
We haven't, I don't think we've had anyone come along with a whole fully formed piece of content that's new that they're proposing by PR. I think we should definitely about what to do.
We should definitely do that via an issue, just first of all, just to kick the tires on, does that make sense in the first place? Okay, let's crack on. So contributing, that's actually the next section. So how can you contribute? We talk about this quite a bit as far as the Q project is concerned, because sort of it might feel a bit daunting that actually the only way you can contribute to Q is to contribute some code to the main Q repository. It's absolutely not the case. It's fundamentally the case that using Q itself is actually a wonderful way of contributing. And a lot of the questions we get on Slack are for totally incredible different use cases for how Q is being used. And starting to document and share ideas on that is sort of an exciting journey as we go. Asking questions via GitHub discussions and Slack is two. Also, where content on QLang.org doesn't meet your needs, that's a very good way of doing it too. Raising issues, bugs, all of these points that are listed here are ways of contributing to Q. At the bottom there, you have creating content. This is not ordered in any way, but it's just to say that honestly, there's no there should be no barrier to contributing to the Q project in any way. If you want to do something as simple as a typo fix, honestly, as simple as that might be, that actually, if it's a critical typo, it could be of huge value and significance to anybody else who's following along. So as simple as it may be a high value contribution. Simply creating a piece of content would also be very valuable too. So where do you start? We've talked about the docs and content repo as being the place where new content ideas and drafts are in the form of issues. As the last bullet point there, we sort of talked about how we then use the docs and content roadmap as a means of actually planning what content changes we're doing. The main issue tracker, Qlang Q issues, is where really this sort of more general purpose issues to do with the Q project itself. And discussions is the place that we've talked about where if you've got any questions about Q, contributing, whatever it might be, in addition to Slack. Oh, we have a blank slide here. I get the feeling, Jonathan, we've lost a screenshot there. And you're on mute, Jonathan.
Was it a screenshot perhaps of the report an issue button?
It was, and I don't know where it's gone. I thought the actual live demo was going to go wrong, not the slide deck. So there we go. We'll fix that up. This just demonstrates actually that this screenshot that you can't see nicely demonstrates that at the bottom of each page, there's a convenience link that allows you to report an issue with that page. It captures all of the details of exactly what version of the site you were looking at, what page you were looking at, and so it allows you then to just quickly fill out an issue report with what the problem is. If it's a bug with a piece of content, we'll move that over to the docs and content repo and ensure that that then gets captured as a bug on the content side of things. Anything else, we'll just sort of take care of the triage on that sort of thing.
So nobody needs to care about where they're putting it. If it's like you're looking at qlang.org, currently alpha, but soon not to be, and you see a problem, whether it be text or formatting or whatever, it's just clicking that link and we'll do all the triage after that point.
Totally. The thing is, I think we can optimize that triage process or make it easier by perhaps having sort of a couple of links. But for now, it's just very simple. Report an issue. Quite frankly, the feedback itself via the report an issue thing it worked incredibly well for package.go.dev when they first launched package site. There were just sort of bugs here or there or small problems, and the convenience of being able to click the link, it pre-populate an issue, you quickly fill it in, drop in a screenshot, hit send was huge. And things improved massively as a result of that sort of easy ability, low barrier to entry to raising issues. So we'll fix up the screenshot. Apologies, I don't know how that's missed, but there it is. Just a quick reminder on how you can get in touch on any of this with the Q project itself. So then next steps, really just to summarize, alpha.qlang.org to go live, as we said, targeting the 20th of March, which is looking pretty good. We've also forgotten something else in the slide deck, Jonathan, where we were going to slightly tease the new headline image that will appear on the qlang.org homepage. Folks will now have to wait until the 20th of March to actually see that. And so look forward to feedback on any aspect of the design of qlang.org when alpha.qlang.org is the real life thing. We're going to create more content along the way. And as I said, we'll drive that via the docs and content roadmap. We need to build out the qlang.org roadmap as well. As you saw, that sort of is a tiny bit unloved at the moment, and the docs and content one is very much receiving the bulk of Jonathan's attention at the moment. And we're also going to have more docs and content calls where we can cover anything. Maybe we can sort of do a live stream on one of those, Jonathan, of a beginning to end creation of a piece of content, for example. That would seem like a nice way to get started.
I've also got in mind that I'd love to do it where we took a few folks from the process of not being able to author content through to the process where they've actually submitted a CL, whether or not it's a formal CL they intend to get merged, but actually just that end-to-end process to get people into the place of knowing that that folks can achieve that.
Yep, perfect. I think we're done at that point. I noticed Cedric's joined us. Greetings, Cedric. If there's any questions, happy to take them right now. Jonathan, I think we sort of hypothesized a few things that we might have sort of asked ourselves as questions at this point, but actually we've covered them as we've gone through, particularly your point there on, well, what if I find a typo? What would I do, for example? Please just either report an issue. That's that is helpful in and of itself, right? Don't feel obliged to actually submit a change. If you want to submit a change and you only feel like fixing the typo, that's totally fine as well. If you actually want to go the whole hog, run the preprocessor, which is incredibly light. If you're just fixing a typo, even better. And then if you actually want to get into the state of creating a piece of content, please just get in touch, and happy to help sort of walk through that. As we said, we might do a live stream where we talk about that in a bit more detail, sort of going from concept to let's flesh it out a tiny bit more, demonstrating how that moves through the project board, to then creating the piece of content, pushing it up, reviewing it, and publishing, all within the hour.
And I know some folks have occasionally stumbled on finding this, but the Qlang /qlang.org repo has got a dedicated alpha branch.
Yep.
That is the current alpha content against which you can submit PRs for typos, etc.
When it goes live, that will obviously become the default branch. Cedric, anything?
I could say from my personal experience trying to get up to speed on everything, what was successful for me was one, reading through the little bit of the code base on the alpha branch just to see how everything fits together. I know I had a little bit of issue getting that Hugo working on WSL, that Windows subsystem that I talked about.
Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, but it was actually pretty easy to do. You just added extra flags, and then of course, being familiar with diataxis, so I knew the general structure, how everything worked out, was very helpful for me, as well as getting comfortable looking at the boards frequently and the issues just to see the new ones that pop up. Sometimes I'm unclear like how, I'm assuming there's some like one-on-one communication just because it's a small thing right now between Paul and Jonathan, like what's being chosen, how the work is flowing through, but I'll start looking at that board more frequently, and maybe I'll get more insight on that.
That's a very good point, is that we're just in terms of the boards are very new.
Yeah.
And so let me be just very humble on behalf of the Q project, is that honestly, if there's a better way of us doing things, we're sort of learning as we go with these things. Indeed, we want to get more of this communication, as you talked about, that is happening offline. It's not that there's anything sort of secret behind the idea to say, well, let's plan this piece of content next. It's much more right now is, what is the priority list for stuff in order to get alpha.qlang.org live? And so that's driving our priorities right now, is sort of where is the fire burning the brightest, if you like, on some sort of piece of content that needs creating or fixing up or whatever. So it's a sort of, dare I say, a bit chaotic at the moment. Jonathan would probably smile and agree with that assessment. But as the dust settles with alpha.qlang.org going live, then I think we can start to just add, I'm really sort of inspired by the Go proposal process here, where there is just the sort of a turning of the handle of, here's an idea, do we want to go with it? Yes. And just being as light touch as possible to sort of get out of the way of people on things. That's exactly what we're aiming for. So hopefully we can start to share that a bit more, and maybe we just even use docs and content calls as a way of having a chat about it, and Jonathan, whoever being on the call, just triaging the project board a bit to work out what we prioritize and do next. That would certainly work as well.
I actually think the process is fine right now because it seems very fluid, and you want to optimize for that kind of quick iteration. It's mostly me trying to figure out how do I hook into that myself. I've been just kind of doing it myself because, you know, I have only time here and there to contribute. So but I was able to make contributions. For example, that reporting an issue thing, it wasn't putting the right Git hash, and so I made that change to store the hash, right?
Super kind, yeah.
Yeah, so it's more really about, I really want to get into the flow of making actual documentation, running out the content. I think it's just picking which ones, like my mastery over the Q language itself, so I can describe it, as well as, I think right now, like, it's a little bit unclear about what the core workflows we are targeting with Q. For example, you know, with the traditional language, there's a pretty specific goal you're trying to write, and then there's like the actual process of taking code, compiling it to some executable, and then deploying that somewhere where it can do useful work. It's a little different fundamentally because we're dealing with data here that we're probably going to feed into another system. But like, I think maybe mapping out the stories and focusing on the highest leverage ones would be more of a focusing tool for us to find out like what's the thing, because we can go in so many directions. And I think it also helped clarify, you know, our say design and where we're trying to iterate towards Q as general by like focusing on like what's the end goals here. Because right now, you know, I think we're focusing on the broad brush. We gotta get those pieces in place, like the modules and the core languages. But then once that's in place, like we have to focus on things that will get people to solve a problem that will want people to use the Q, the language. And so I think making that transition and start thinking about that will be useful.
Would it be worth saying anything about the sort of the intent that you've mentioned about getting the Q by example stuff into a tested state? Perhaps.
Yeah,
I think what Cedric's talking about there is stuff that's much more in a real world context than the stuff that we're somewhat limited to on QLang.org with the division of those things. And at the moment, the authoring process is significantly different.
I was going to say, I think Cedric hits at sort of the heart of a key point there, is that QLang.org is Kelsey Hightower sort of tried to help shape what sort of separation makes sense between the core language site itself and where things can be applied. And he's tried to help say, well, actually, you know what, if for example, let's just take the example I referenced earlier on, which is using Q with BuildKite. Now, it gets a bit tricky if we sort of think of all CI systems out there and coming up with a Q example of that. Does that really usefully belong on QLang.org, or does QLang.org then start to get cluttered with, in a good way but perhaps an unhelpful way, with all the different types of use cases that Q has and all the different instances of systems in those different use cases? And it was Kelsey thinking that actually that's a useful distinction to have, whereby you have, let me learn about the language, the core concepts, and the sort of the building blocks fundamentally of how these things can be used in practice. And then having the example, like using Q with BuildKite or using Q with GitHub Actions or Kubernetes, whatever, in a separate venue. And then you either land on the QLang.org site and are directed to, and here's a practical example of it on Q by example, or you land on Q by example and you're directed back. Cedric, I think it's a great point. I don't know we've perfectly got the split right yet. We probably need slightly more on QLang.org, as it will be, that goes beyond just the pure language building blocks or modules to go that one layer, make the building block slightly one layer higher, as it were, so that then the jump, as it were, between QLang.org and Q by example is not so big, whichever way you look at it. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do, and there's also making sure people can navigate this content, and whether when they come in, understand, well, how can I get that bird's eye view of what I can use Q for? We sort of fundamentally have to answer that on the QLang.org site as well as Q by example. And we've got to help people navigate through it. So I think there's a decent amount to do in terms of, from a signposting perspective as well, to make sure people can get that bird's eye view without just landing on a specific piece of content and have to go up to the bird's eye view themselves. I think it's a great point and a great challenge.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on this. It was just
Great.
like, it was pretty dense and I didn't want to like write it out. And I think I needed a conversation. I know from learning a little bit of marketing, there's a certain concept of awareness, where you go through different stages where people just like don't know about something, they don't even know how they have a problem, and then going all the way to like truly committed to this thing. And so I think a lot of the problem is right now, most people don't know that there's like a big problem with, like, they just do the straightforward thing to solve configuration.
Mhm.
And so I think at the base level, education, we're going to teach people about this problem, how we solve it. I know a good example of this was this one company called Honeycomb. They work in the observability space with those wide events, and then being able to officially search through it for, like, you know, incident analysis. I think they did something intelligent where they directly separated out the concept of observability from logging, and they said this is like a specific way and they did a lot of work in, through blog posts, teaching, to separate out those contents, those two separate things, and really do education on the solution. And I'm assuming that's part of like the rollout strategy because it is a company. But that was also, I think, something we will probably have to do just
Yep.
because we're trying to do a new thing. Also, I think there's something that's useful because fundamentally we have to target so many different technologies and the integration points. It's a big part of what makes Q work. Is there's something in, we say general in SEO, but like you could think of like the entry point, how people will find Q in the first place, and that'll be the community, through the blog posts, just like general organic stuff. But I think there's an example, say with Zapier, that tool for like integrating this system with another system with like webhooks and stuff. They have like all these generated pages for like if I want to use this tool with this tool, like your email with Twitter or something, right?
Mhm.
And so they programmatically generate those like each individual landing page and make sure it's easily indexable
Yep.
from search engines, right? That's they call that programmatic SEO.
Mhm.
But the general idea of SEO, I think, is going to be something core. Now that we have like the structure set up with diataxis, good contents, it should render pretty fast. It's more about making sure that we rank on that stuff and
Completely.
create the right entry points. And so
Yep.
going back to that concept of workflows too, there's going to be, we can probably make that matrix of technologies and generate some like useful entry points for that, and maybe point to more specific,
Yep.
handwritten guides. But also, I was thinking about strategies around, if we want to target certain sectors like infrastructure management or data validation, we can maybe think of either organic pieces of content that you post on social media, or something like that'd be like if somebody like search a problem on Google, they can find like a landing page. We can create a bunch of them, and then that will like kind of like drive like towards solving that specific problem with Q, as an example. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of like more the execution side, when you
Yep.
want to like, I don't know, sell something around packaging or again infrastructure management. I could flesh out the idea more, but it's more like creating like specific landing pages, maybe their own domains, on how to do that, and then that'd be like more of a funnel into the Q ecosystem.
When you say their own domains, do you mean literally a different site, or sort of like devops.qlang.org, or did I misunderstand the suggestion there?
I don't think it necessarily has to be its own domain. It's more about the specifics of
Knowledge domains. Okay.
Yeah, to rank it. Like you're thinking first of like the access point, and that's mechanism is do search right now. Sometimes people things find organically. We're probably going to see more stuff through, LLMs in the future. Like just like the things like how do they find it? How do we get it to them so that they first comes up, and we actually have like of course a good solution for those problems. And so that's all part of it. I'm definitely again going to go through and study a little bit about Honeycomb strategy and how they did things, as well as, I think in terms of like good developer outreach, things like Vercel and like the Next ecosystem, they're pretty intensive, right? They had a lot of investment to make that happen. So if we can learn anything from that and apply here, I think
that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
An idea I've had of getting that sort of targeted content at folks is, if I say Microsoft Northwinds, does that mean anything to anyone?
Sadly.
Microsoft had this sort of this holistic example X thing that came with, I think, Access and a whole bunch of other. It came as a database with Access, as a fully formed. Here is like a CRM. Here's a database for you to basically go in and see how they've done something properly. So I did think that maybe there'd be a role for putting out here is almost like a fake organization that is managing a whole bunch of different things in Q. And it's actually, giving rise to some, we know that they work because they're literally being used there in the wild. I don't quite know how that translates into a thing that isn't then a full-time infrastructure engineer's job to keep that working with all of the external service points that will change arbitrarily. But it did feel like that might be something we could do that was more holistically joined up than just the Q by example things there. But yeah,
but
that
we can certainly point to the bits where the Q project itself is using Q to drive things, and we actually should flesh that out more, because there's bits that we haven't surfaced as examples there. Because, for example, where Crossplane is using Q as part of their composition functions, there's an option to use Q there. There's all these sorts of things, Cedric, and I think you make a really powerful point about these different landing sites. Let's just call them landing pages, excuse me. And I think it's the extent to which we use tags to capture those different domains potentially, or working out how because that was this is sort of part of the thinking behind the new site structure as well. It's very, very flat, and intentionally so, because having an opinion on how things are structured from a domain perspective or a use case perspective or a user perspective is actually really hard, and you end up enforcing one structure that it works for perhaps one group or one domain or whatever, it doesn't for others. And so we're holding tags at the moment as being that multi-hierarchical way of structuring data. And so hopefully with the right tags, then you can get those different lenses on a whole load of content and just sort of filter your view down to a specific set of tags, and then get a view that is appropriate to you. And so hopefully that works as a strategy, but would be delighted if you've got ideas on how we can, with, for example, automated generation of landing pages, etc. I think it's great. And then we can sort of flesh those out as we go, once we've got the generated pages in place.
Lenses is a great concept to think about it. I would say expand it out, we're thinking about search itself and how those are entry points to things. But also, I'd say the generate pages would be maybe a way to take since the structure of the actual site is pretty flat, as you said.
Yep.
Now you're using separate pages, like newer pages that you can point people to, that collects those, more flat pages into a more opinionated flow, right? And you can create, if you want a different lens on something, you create a new page for that, and this could be automated. This could be handwritten, like a home page, right? When you have a start here or something like that, you can go from specific flows. I think that will probably be the most flexible structure to achieve what
completely agree,
right? Because just fundamentally, again, this problem that we're trying to solve is highly integrative, many different technologies, many different use cases than versus I think a normal programming language. So we'll probably need a much more sophisticated strategy on this.
Yeah, the thing is, we've started hopefully small and simple, but hopefully designed it in such a way, a simple design, and with a simple design such that we don't paint ourselves into a corner with already having defined a hierarchy of how these pages. It's intentionally flat because guess what? We didn't know the answer. And so keeping it flat and then heavily using tags and having those custom handwritten landing pages, as you said, or ones that are automatically generated. I'm sure there's tons of ideas that we can explore in this space, but we've very much been taking the approach of, if we don't have a really good hypothesis on what the answer is, we'll sort of slightly defer on it, use tags as a way of coming up with a way of testing a hypothesis. And then exactly as you say, and this is kind of the thing that Jonathan's been pushing on hard, saying, look, if you've got a DevOps tag, you then really want a DevOps landing page. Let's just take that as an example, where someone who identifies as a DevOps or relates that that's what the primary part of their work is, they can land on it and go, oh yeah, I can relate to the content on this page. And from there, it can link to other material that is tagged as DevOps, and they can feel like they've got a custom experience. But in the reality, actually, it's just a whole load of flat content that has been nicely tagged and presented to them in a way that it's then easier to navigate from their perspective. So I think what you're saying resonates very strongly. We haven't done a lot in terms of building those custom landing pages right now. Is that something we would like to do because we think it would work? 100%, because exactly what you said is resonates very strongly. So thanks for sharing.
It's step 2, right? Because one, I think Diataxis is the foundation. It's a good way to organize. And again, you need the content, otherwise there's nothing to point to. But once we create these things, I definitely want people to read it and to get value from it. So I do think it's important that we think about this, just because it's not enough just to build something. You really have to be intentional about getting people to see it.
That is brilliant feedback. Thank you. And would be great to sort of swap notes on all of this stuff. So
Yeah. So I'll probably be reaching out to her just to more directly get involved at this point.
yeah,
Just because
wonderful.
I have a general idea. So
And you've created a whole load of wonderful content in the past, going back to the first time that you met Marcel and talking about how Q can influence things. So yeah,
it's kind of crazy. That was like 2019. It feels like so long. 5 years now.
Great. We're slightly over time here, so we'll call an end to it there. But thank you, Cedric, for joining, Jonathan for working on so much of the content behind these things and getting us close to the point where we can go live. 20th of March is the date that we're targeting for that. So barring any major hiccups between now and then, and we will be also doing the first blog post on and around the go live date as well, and then having the blog as being exactly as you were hinting, Cedric, a means of us sharing content in a slightly different form that is either saying, have you seen this or whatever, or just sort of explanatory pieces, whatever there might be. So look forward to working out exactly what form that should take going forward as well.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to say too.
Yeah, please.
In terms of, focusing on those workflows, I definitely was looking for something that's like, when you think of the concept of pain, especially for like in the user journeys, like there's some problems that like really like, pull your hair out. We got to solve this now. That's the things that really like, how do I use the technology to really solve this problem? I've been looking for that for Q because I think that's going to be like the strongest hook into starting this whole like flywheel. So have some ideas then. I think obviously like stuff like infrastructure management's probably going to be the thing, but it's more about like getting the right story that they say, okay, this is going to solve my problem.
Yeah. So. And I think if we sort of step back slightly from just talking about content here to what else is happening, what else we're trying to do on the Q project, there's sort of a number of things that are happening concurrently at the moment towards that end goal, if you like. So for example, Marcel's focus on the evaluator and the performance of the evaluator. That's a critical piece as far as ensuring that if someone is managing a 100, 200,000 line configuration using Q, that actually it performs in the way that we expect it to. Modules, for example, as being a building block, critical building block of people sharing schemas, configuration, whatever it might be. And so all of these pieces slot together. And so you're quite right, though, that we have to ensure that the communication piece, and let's sort of use qlang.org as the main medium through which we communicate with folks here in terms of helping them understand. You're quite right. That's like the critical icing on the cake as far as getting the story across to people is concerned. So yeah, very much looking forward to getting this live, getting the old qlang.org out of the way, and unblocking on creating new content.
Yeah, once you go live, you're going to get much more feedback, and I think it'll speed up the process. So
wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.